A 9-year-old boy stood up for a downtrodden woman who was facing harsh humiliation from a callous bus driver. The next day, a Mercedes arrived at his school, leaving everyone astonished. On a gloomy morning, Oliver and his dad Leo stood at the bus stop. The cool breeze brought a serene hush over the bustling metropolis as they conversed. Leo, particularly focused, imparted his final guidance to his son since he couldn't accompany him to school due to a crucial job interview. "You recall what I told you, right, son? I won't be able to walk you today as I have an interview lined up. Remember to alight at the stop close to your school as we discussed, all right? It's a big city, so stay vigilant. We don't want you getting lost," Leo conveyed with a blend of concern and assurance in his tone. The 9-year-old boy, displaying a hint of independence, reassured his father with determination. "I'm 9 now, Dad. I've got this," he declared, though his smile betrayed his nerves about his first solo commute. With a proud yet emotional smile, Leo tousled his son's hair. It marked a moment of maturity, a poignant goodbye to childhood. "That's my boy," Leo said, his voice steady, masking his emotions. The bus rolled in with a deep rumble, its large metal body swallowing and spitting out passengers. "Look, the bus is here," Leo announced, helping the youngster aboard. With a tight hug, they bid farewell, promising to reunite later. Oliver boarded, paid his fare, and greeted the driver with a shy, "Good morning." Watching the bus depart, Leo's mind oscillated between interview anxieties and hopes for his son's day. Seated in a corner, Oliver settled in as if it were his own universe, peering through the window. He observed the people, streets, and gray sky, lost in childish musings. The city passed by, its colors faded, accompanied by murmurs of conversation and engines. Yet, what seemed like an ordinary day was poised to become a journey of discovery and challenge. As the bus rumbled forward, Oliver couldn't fathom the surprises looming ahead. This day was bound to steer his life down an unforeseen path, one of those rare moments that shape our character and destiny. Little did he realize that his capacity for empathy would face a trial. At a bustling station, the bus halted, welcoming a stream of passengers. Amidst them, one figure stood out conspicuously. A woman, her countenance etched with anxiety, boarded the bus. Her eyes darted restlessly, scanning the surroundings as if in perpetual search. They mirrored a tangible fear and profound worry, leaving an impact on all who caught her gaze. She seemed out of place, carrying an aura of despair that enveloped her like an invisible cloak. It was her turn to go in, but she was stopped at the turnstile because she hadn't paid the fare. With hesitation, she mumbled to the driver that she didn't have the money for the ticket. Her voice was shaking, and it was clear how stunned and embarrassed she was by the situation. The driver, who was clearly not on his best day, exploded into outrage. His words were harsh and cruel. "What do you mean you have no money? Then what the hell are you doing here? Get off, girl, get off my bus." The way he raised his voice and the brutality of his words resonated throughout the vehicle, attracting curious and embarrassed looks. The woman, visibly humiliated, began to beg, trying to explain her need to get to her destination and promising with painful sincerity that she would come back to pay. "Sir, I swear I'll come back to pay you," she pleaded. But the driver was merciless, hurling accusations and unfounded judgments at her, further aggravating her humiliating situation. "As if I'm going to let trash like you ride my bus for free, and I'm going to believe that you're going to come back and pay the fare. I know your kind very well, you're all scammers," he shouted loud and clear. Tears began to flow from the poor girl's eyes, tracing paths of despair across her face. The situation escalated, and it looked like the driver was about to use physical force to remove her from the bus. He was already getting up to grab her by the arm and throw her out of the vehicle. Oliver, who until then had watched the scene with growing discomfort and indignation, could no longer contain himself. He saw that no one else seemed willing to help. Then he stood up, his small figure and determination in his eyes. With a trembling hand, he took his lunch money, the money he knew his father had worked hard to provide for him. He was looking forward to finally buying that pizza at school he wanted so much but couldn't always afford. However, without hesitation, he abandoned his needs in favor of an act of compassion. With determined steps, he approached the driver and held out his hand with the money. "There it is. Now she can get on the bus," he said in a firm voice that contrasted with his age. With a disgusted look at the man, the boy returned to his seat, feeling a mixture of anger and pride, anger at the inhuman way the driver was treating the woman and pride at having done the right thing. His little heart was pounding, not so much at the loss of his lunch money but at the intensity of what he had just done. It was a small gesture that marked not only his day but who he was becoming, a great young man. And so the bus went on, carrying with it a story of courage and humanity in the middle of a gray morning. After little Oliver's act of courage, all the passengers were plunged into a surprised and amazed silence. The driver, speechless, was still stunned by the child's audacity. People exchanged glances with each other, murmuring about the little one's attitude. The woman, now allowed to continue her journey, went to sit beside her savior. Her eyes still bore traces of tears, but there was a new sparkle in them, a mixture of relief and gratitude. "I can't thank you enough, little buddy," she said, her voice still shaky. The boy, with a maturity that seemed beyond his years, took a handkerchief out of his backpack and offered it to her to dry her face. "It's okay. Nobody should be treated like that," he replied simply. The little boy then shared his own experience with the driver, recalling a day when his father, Leo, was 10 cents short and how they were scolded, humiliated by the heartless man, and forced to get off the bus and walk all the way home. The woman listened, her expression alternating between shock and sadness, but she insisted that she would somehow repay the boy for his kindness. While they talked, the world outside continued its course. The bus moved through the streets, passing buildings, stores, and more stops. People got on and off, each immersed in their own lives and stories, oblivious to the small act of kindness that took place inside that vehicle. The conversation between Oliver and the woman was brief but meaningful. He told her his name, and she gave him a gentle smile. Soon, the little one's stop arrived. He waved goodbye and got off the bus, walking with firm steps toward WS, the little school. The woman followed his journey through the window until he was out of sight, her heart still warmed by the little boy's selfless gesture. But as Oliver walked away, completely oblivious to the impact of his actions, the woman remained on the bus, staring at him. No one there could have guessed who she really was. She wasn't just a figure in trouble, a poor homeless woman, or a scammer as the driver had suggested. Her true identity was something that would leave everyone, especially the driver and Oliver, completely petrified by the events that would follow. And so, as the bus went on its way, each passenger took a piece of this story with them, not knowing how extraordinary it would become. The boy spent the day at school with an empty stomach, remembering the pizza he had so longed to buy. Despite his hunger, he didn't regret his attitude because he knew it was the right thing to do. When he returned home, he shared the story of the bus with his father. Leo listened attentively, and his eyes shone with a mixture of pride and emotion. "Your mother would be very proud of you," he said, his voice carrying a sweetness tinged with sadness. The man hugged his son tightly and then opened his wallet, giving him $10. "Here, son, for you to buy that slice of pizza tomorrow, and there will still be some money left for the other days," said his father. Oliver jumped for joy, hugging him in gratitude. Leo continued, "You see, buddy, good things are always rewarded." He tried to keep his tone light and hopeful, even though he knew that money was precious. However, they both had no idea how great the reward that was yet to come would be. The next day, Leo took Oliver to school. Unfortunately, the man had been told that he hadn't gotten the job as a delivery man because He was considered older than the other candidates, even though he was only 37. This made him sad and worried about how he would support his son, especially now that he needed a job more than ever. After the death of his wife, Leo was plunged into despair. His son was only 3 years old at the time, and the next 6 years were marked by struggles and uncertainties, with his father working odd jobs and dropping out of college, giving up his degree in automation engineering to devote himself entirely to raising Oliver. That morning, after dropping the boy off at school, Leo went to talk to the principal about his son's financial situation. Oliver had a scholarship at the private school, but it was about to end. Without a new scholarship or a stable job, the man feared he would no longer be able to keep his son in the school. However, while the little boy was settling down in the classroom and the man was dealing with financial matters, a very fancy Mercedes pulled up in front of the school. The gates opened, and a serene figure stepped out of the car. It was the woman from the bus the day before. The woman who got out of the luxury car was the embodiment of elegance and mystery. Her elegant figure and sophisticated clothing caught everyone's attention at the school, contrasting sharply with the desolate image she presented on the bus. She walked up to the reception desk with an aura that swung between authority and gentleness, attracting looks of admiration and curiosity. When she asked about Oliver and where he lived, there was an urgency in her voice, a need to connect with the boy who had shown her that unexpected kindness. The school, protective of its students, was obviously hesitant, as they didn't know what a stranger wanted with him. But the coincidence that Leo was there dealing with financial matters made the meeting easier. "You're lucky his father is here. Do you want to talk to him?" "Because we can't give you any private information about our students," said the employee, noting the importance of the request. "Yes, please call his father." "I'll be waiting," the woman asked with the politeness of a princess. A few minutes later, Leo, with an expression of concern and curiosity, was led up to her. When he saw her, his mind spun in disbelief. She was stunning, with a beauty that seemed to illuminate her surroundings. "Mr. Leo," announced the receptionist, "this woman said that your son helped her on the bus yesterday and wanted to talk to you." The man's heart beat faster, not only because of his surprise but also because he remembered Oliver's story about the poor woman on the bus. It didn't make sense because he thought it was a homeless woman, not the goddess he was seeing in front of him. She introduced herself, "Hello, Leo, my name is Daisy," and began narrating her interaction with the little boy, expressing her gratitude and admiration for him. Her words were like music to the father's ears, who listened attentively, each sentence boosting his paternal pride. "He was a real gentleman, offering me a handkerchief and paying for my ticket. Such a young boy with such a big heart," she said with emotion in her voice. The two left the reception and went to talk in the school garden, where the conversation flowed naturally in that quiet, welcoming space. As they walked, the woman shared more about her intention to help the little boy. She spoke about the importance of education and how moved she was by the situation of Leo and his son, as the receptionist had told her about them while she was waiting for him to arrive. "It's hard to find such kindness and courage these days. Your son is really special, and you're an incredible father for raising him like this," she said, looking into his eyes. Then Daisy made the offer that would change their lives. "I'd like to pay for your son's education. It's a small way of repaying the great kindness he has shown me." Leo was speechless. His mind struggled to process the generosity and the impact it would have on his and Oliver's future. The man tried to refuse the offer, moved by surprise. "No, I can't accept it. It's too much," he said. But the woman insisted, her determination evident in every word. "Please, Leo, I insist. You deserve it." Overwhelmed by emotion and gratitude, the father finally gave in. Tears began to stream down his face as he fell to his knees on the garden lawn. Thank you so much," he murmured over and over again, each word a sigh of relief and joy. In the middle of that garden, among the flowers and under the open sky, a simple act of kindness had unleashed a wave of generosity and hope that would transform their lives forever. The two of them sat on a bench under the shade of a tree. The atmosphere of the school enveloped them in a welcoming embrace. The woman began to tell her story, and each word revealed a reality that sounded more extraordinary than any fiction. Daisy Rohr was the daughter of a luxury car magnate, August Rohr, and the previous morning, just before sunrise, she had been the victim of an attempted kidnap. She described how, by a stroke of luck and determination, she managed to escape from the car in which she was captured, running desperately through the city. When she was already far away but still fearful of being found, with the crowd waking up to work, she got on the first bus she saw without any money or belongings. The anguish and fear were evident in her voice as she recounted the despair of that moment. Leo listened, each word painting a clearer picture of the woman in front of him. When Oliver helped her, she mentally recorded the location of the school, determined to find a way to repay his kindness. As she stepped out of the car, aided by a kind stranger, she dialed her dad, who promptly came to her rescue. The crooks were nabbed later thanks to the city's surveillance, and she was now out of harm's way. Leo found the tale both bewildering and awe-inspiring. Destiny had intricately linked his son's life with hers in a profound manner. While they conversed, Leo's son dashed to the playground and stumbled upon his father and Daisy. His face lit up with astonishment and happiness at the sight of her. "Hey, you're the girl from the bus." After hearing the entire ordeal, the boy was dumbfounded, realizing the impact of his actions in saving her. She invited them to a diner, promising the boy his long-craved pizza. Oliver leaped with joy, and she chuckled, charmed by his innocence and happiness. After their first encounter, a real friendship blossomed between them. Daisy paid frequent visits, bringing a fresh sense of kinship and happiness to Oliver and Leo. Upon learning of the man's interrupted education, she appealed to her father, who then provided him with the chance to finish his studies and work as an engineer at the posh car company. Their lives took an unexpected turn, completely transforming due to a simple act of kindness on a bus. As time passed, Leo and Daisy fell in love, and Oliver finally found the mother figure he had longed for. Together, they formed a tight-knit family bound not just by love but also by the understanding that kindness and empathy can wield extraordinary power. Their tale demonstrated the power of a simple act of kindness to ripple through lives, touching souls and reshaping fates. Thus, thanks to the compassionate gesture of a young boy aboard a bus, the trajectory of one family's existence altered, blooming into joy and affection.
Help us reach 1,000 subscribers on the new channel, Cheating Tales Lab. We hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. James Kavanaugh's fingers drummed an impatient rhythm on the armrest as his flight descended into Dulles International Airport. He wasn't supposed to be here, not yet. The tech conference in Tokyo had another 3 days to run, but that text message on Victoria's phone, it gnawed at him, an itch he couldn't scratch. Meeting confirmed for 2 a.m. You know where. He'd seen it by chance, a notification popping up while Victoria was in the shower. Work-related, she'd said when he'd asked. But at 2 a.m., something didn't add up. As James collected his luggage and hailed a taxi, his mind raced through possibilities. Was he overreacting, letting his imagination run wild? But years of coding had honed his ability to spot patterns, to sense when something was off. And this felt very off indeed. The cab pulled up to their house, a sleek, modern structure that James had painstakingly outfitted with the latest smart home technology. He paid the driver and stood for a moment, taking in the familiar facade. Everything looked normal, peaceful, even, but as he approached the front door, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Silence. That was what hit him first as he stepped inside. No cheerful greeting from Alexa, nowhere of the Roomba making its rounds. James had programmed the house to come alive when either of them returned home. So why was it so quiet? "Victoria," he called out, his voice echoing in the stillness. No response. James moved through the living room, his footsteps unnaturally loud on the hardwood floors. The kitchen was empty, the home office undisturbed. He was about to head upstairs when he heard it. A faint splash, followed by a low murmur of voices. His heart pounding, James ascended the stairs, each step measured and silent. The master bedroom door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling out into the hallway. Another splash, a soft giggle. James pushed the door open. Through the steam billowing from the ensuite bathroom, he saw them. Victoria and Gregory Stern, her business partner, entwined in the oversized spa tub. Her head was thrown back, exposing the elegant line of her throat. Gregory's mouth was at her neck, one hand tangled in her hair. For a moment, James couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The scene before him was so surreal, so at odds with everything he thought he knew, that his brain struggled to process it. Then, with a clinical detachment that surprised even him, James began to catalog details. The empty bottle of 1982 Chateau Lafite on the floor. Victoria's favorite perfume mingling with the scent of jasmine bath oil. The way Gregory's wedding ring glinted as his fingers traced Victoria's collarbone. In that moment, as the carefully constructed image of his marriage shattered around him, James felt something inside him harden. The hurt, the betrayal. He packed it all away, sealing it behind a wall of icy determination. They hadn't noticed him yet, too lost in their passion. James allowed himself one more moment to burn the image into his memory. Then, face expressionless, he stepped fully into the room. "Well," James said, his voice flat and emotionless, "isn't this cozy?" Victoria's eyes flew open, widening in shock as she saw James standing there. She scrambled to cover herself, nearly slipping in the tub. "James, you're home early." Gregory, to his credit, didn't try to pretend this was anything other than what it was. He met James's gaze, a hint of a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Come to join the party, Jimmy." James said nothing, his silence more unnerving than any shouting could have been. He simply stood there, taking in the scene with cold, calculating eyes. Victoria, recovering from her initial shock, tried a different tack. Her voice took on a mocking tone, eyes narrowing. "What's the matter, James? Nothing to say? God, you're so boring, so predictable. No wonder I had to find excitement elsewhere." "You should thank us, really," Gregory chimed in, his smugness palpable. "We've livened up your dull little life." Still, James remained silent. His lack of reaction seemed to unsettle them both. They had clearly expected an emotional outburst, tears, rage. Anything but this icy calm. Without a word, James reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. With a few quick taps, he activated an app he'd installed months ago, just in case, just to be prepared. The bathroom's hidden cameras whirred to life, streaming the scene before him to a secure server. "What are you doing?" Victoria snapped, a note of uncertainty creeping into her voice. James didn't answer. Instead, he initiated a video call. The phone rang twice before a familiar face appeared on the screen. "James," Charlotte's voice came through, tinged with concern. "Is everything all right?" Wordlessly, James turned the phone so Charlotte could see her husband and his lover in the tub. The color drained from Charlotte's face as the reality of what she was seeing sank in. Her mouth opened in a silent scream of anguish. Gregory lunged to the phone, but James was faster. He ended the call and slipped the device back into his pocket. "You bastard," Gregory snarled, all pretense of suave confidence gone. Victoria's earlier bravado had evaporated. "James, please. We can talk about this. It doesn't have to." James cut her off with a look, his eyes cold and hard. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the bathroom, leaving Victoria and Gregory to stew in the wreckage of their exposed affair. James moved through the house with mechanical precision, gathering his essential belongings. Clothes, toiletries, important documents, all went into a suitcase with methodical efficiency. His mind was clear, focused solely on the task at hand. He could hear Victoria calling his name, her voice growing more frantic with each repetition. The sound of bare feet slapping against hardwood told him she was following him from room to room. "James, please," she begged, her earlier mockery replaced by desperation. "Let me explain. It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything." James continued packing, not sparing her a glance. "There's nothing to explain. We can work this out," Victoria insisted, grabbing his arm. "I love you. We can get past this." James shook off her grip, his voice devoid of any warmth or emotion. "I'm filing for divorce. You have until the end of the day to leave the house." Victoria's face crumpled. No, you can't. Where am I supposed to go?" "I don't care," James replied, zipping up his suitcase. As James made his way downstairs, Gregory appeared at the bottom of the steps, hastily dressed but still dripping water onto the floor. His earlier smugness was gone, replaced by barely contained rage. "You think you've won something here?" Gregory spat. "You're nothing. A pathetic little man who can't satisfy his wife." James set down his suitcase and pulled out his phone again. Gregory tensed, clearly expecting another call. Instead, James pulled up his contacts and dialed a number. "Owen, it's James. I need your help." Owen Mercer's voice came through, tinny but clear. "What's going on?" "I'm getting divorced. I need to secure my assets and prepare for a legal battle." There was a pause, then Owen's voice, sharp and focused. "I'm on it. Come to my office. We'll get started right away." James ended the call and picked up his suitcase. He looked at Victoria, then at Gregory, his face an impassive mask. "I'd start packing if I were you, Victoria. You don't have much time." With that, he walked out the front door, leaving behind the shattered remains of his marriage and the life he'd thought he knew. As James drove to Owen's office, his mind was already racing ahead, plotting his next moves. The pain and betrayal were there, simmering beneath the surface, but he refused to let them control him. Instead, he channeled that energy into a cold, hard determination. They thought he was weak, predictable, boring. Well, he would show them just how wrong they were. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. James Kavanaugh sat in his temporary office, a small, windowless room in the back of Owen's law firm. The space was cluttered with stacks of legal documents and financial records. A half-empty cup of cold coffee sat forgotten on the edge of the desk. It had been 3 weeks since he'd walked in on Victoria and Gregory, 3 weeks of sleepless nights and endless paperwork. But now, finally, it was time to go on the offensive. James picked up his phone and dialed a number he'd been given by Owen. After 2 rings, a crisp, professional voice answered. "Evelyn Pierce speaking." "Ms. Pierce, this is James Kavanaugh. I was told you're the best at what you do." There was a brief pause. "That depends on what you need done, Mr. Kavanaugh." James leaned back in his chair, his voice steady. "I need you to dig into every aspect of Gregory Stern's life. His business dealings, his personal affairs, his past. I want to know everything, especially anything he's tried to keep hidden." "I see." Evelyn's tone remained neutral. "And may I ask why you're interested in Mr. Stern?" "Let's just say he's made himself my enemy. I intend to make him regret that decision." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Very well, Mr. Kavanaugh. I'll take the case. But I should warn you, this kind of deep dive can be expensive." James allowed himself a small, "Money isn't an issue. Just find me what I need." After ending the call, James sat back, his mind racing. Evelyn Pierce was just the first step. He had other moves to make, other pieces to put into play. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Charlotte, Gregory's soon-to-be ex-wife. "Can we meet? I think we need to talk." James stared at the message for a long moment. He hadn't spoken to Charlotte since that fateful video call. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to focus solely on his own vendetta. But another part, the part that still remembered what it was like to be betrayed and alone, made him type out a reply. Coffee shop on 4th Street. 1 hour. Charlotte was already there when James arrived, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. She looked up as he approached, her eyes red-rimmed but determined. "James," she said softly, "thank you for coming." He slid into the seat across from her, ordering a black coffee from the hovering waitress. "What did you want to talk about, Charlotte?" She took a deep breath. "I filed for divorce, but I don't want to just walk away. Not after what they did to us. I want to help you bring Gregory down." James studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. Finding none, he nodded slowly. "All right, what did you have in mind?" Charlotte leaned forward, her voice low and intense. "I've been Gregory's wife for 15 years. I know things, James. Things about his business practices, his clients, his indiscretions. I think, together, we might be able to do some real damage." A spark of interest lit in James's eyes. "Tell me more." For the next hour, Charlotte laid out everything she knew about Gregory's less-than-ethical business dealings. By the time they finished, James had pages of notes and a growing sense of anticipation. As they stood to leave, Charlotte caught James's arm. "There's one more thing," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I found some old financial records in Gregory's home office. I think he might have been involved in some kind of embezzlement scheme years ago, before we were married." James's eyebrows shot up. "Do you have proof?" Charlotte shook her head. "Not concrete proof, no, but enough to make me suspicious. Maybe your investigator could look into it." James nodded, his mind already racing with the possibilities. "I'll have her check it out. Thank you, Charlotte. This could be exactly what we need." As he watched Charlotte walk away, James felt a twinge of something he hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could pull this off. Back in his temporary office, James began to formulate his plan. The pieces were falling into place. Evelyn Pierce digging into Gregory's past, Charlotte's insider knowledge, and now, the possibility of a long-buried financial scandal. James picked up his phone and opened a secure messaging app. It was time to start leaking some of the information he'd gathered. Nothing too damaging. Not yet. Just enough to get people talking, to plant the seeds of doubt in the minds of Gregory's clients and colleagues. He started with a video from the spa tub, carefully edited to obscure the more explicit details, but leaving no doubt as to the participants' identities. He sent it to a few key people in Gregory's social circle, using an anonymous email account. Next came some of the information Charlotte had provided about Gregory's questionable business practices. This went to a select group of Gregory's clients, again through untraceable channels. As he worked, James felt a cold satisfaction settling over him. This was just the beginning. Soon, Gregory's carefully constructed world would begin to crumble, piece by piece. Days turned into weeks as James divided his time between working with Owen on the divorce proceedings and coordinating with Evelyn and Charlotte on their investigation into Gregory. Evelyn proved to be worth every penny of her exorbitant fee. She dug up dirt on Gregory that even Charlotte hadn't known about. Offshore accounts, shell companies, a pattern of behavior that suggested a long history of financial manipulation and fraud. But it was when she started looking into Gregory's past that things really got interesting. "Mr. Kavanaugh," Evelyn's voice crackled over the phone. "I think I found something you'll want to see." An hour later, James sat in Evelyn's sparse, efficient office, staring at the documents spread out before him. "It took some doing," Evelyn said, her tone matter-of-fact. "He buried it deep, but there's no doubt. Early in his career, Gregory Stern was involved in a massive embezzlement scheme. We're talking millions of dollars, siphoned off from client accounts and funneled through a series of shell companies." James leafed through the papers, his eyes widening as he took in the details. "This is incredible. How did he get away with it?" Evelyn's lips thinned. "A combination of luck, skill, and what I suspect was some well-placed bribery. But the evidence is there, if you know where to look." James sat back, his mind racing. This was it, the silver bullet he'd been looking for. With this information, he could destroy Gregory completely, but he had to be smart about it, strategic. If he moved too quickly, Gregory might find a way to wiggle out of it. "What do you recommend?" he asked Evelyn. She considered for a moment. An anonymous tip to the authorities would be the safest bet. Provide them with enough evidence to start an investigation, but not so much that they question where it came from. James nodded slowly. "Do it, and keep digging. I want to know everything there is to know about this scheme." As he left Evelyn's office, James felt a surge of adrenaline. The game was truly on now. Over the next few days, James watched with satisfaction as his plan began to bear fruit. The leaked video and business information had done their job. Whispers were spreading through Gregory's social and professional circles. People were starting to ask questions, to look at him with suspicion rather than admiration. And then, the coup de grace. The anonymous tip to the authorities about Gregory's past embezzlement hit like a bombshell. James was having coffee with Charlotte when the news broke. They watched on the cafe's TV as a grim-faced reporter detailed the allegations against Gregory Stern, prominent businessman and pillar of the community. "Officials have confirmed that Mr. Stern's assets have been frozen pending a full investigation," the reporter said. Sources close to the matter suggest that the scope of the alleged fraud is staggering, potentially reaching into the tens of millions of dollars. Charlotte's hand flew to her mouth. "My God," she whispered. "I knew he was corrupt, but this." James said nothing, but a small, satisfied smile played at the corners of his mouth. He thought of Victoria, wondering how she was taking the news, if she was regretting her choices yet. As the days passed, Gregory's fall from grace accelerated. His clients abandoned him in droves. The stock price of his company plummeted. Every news outlet in the city seemed to be running stories about the great Gregory Stern and his spectacular downfall. James watched it all unfold with a detached sort of interest. He felt no joy in Gregory's destruction, no sense of triumph, just a cold, empty satisfaction that justice was finally being served. The final nail in the coffin came with the divorce settlements. Thanks to Owen's skillful maneuvering and the mountain of evidence James had accumulated, Victoria was left with a fraction of what she'd expected. James sat in Owen's office, reviewing the final documents. "She's really agreed to this?" he asked, somewhat incredulous. Owen nodded, a satisfied smile on his face. She didn't have much choice. Between the prenup and the evidence of her infidelity, not to mention her association with Gregory's scandal, she's lucky to be getting anything at all. James leaned back in his chair, letting out a long breath. It was over. Really, truly over. As if on cue, his phone rang. It was his family's lawyer. "Mr. Kavanaugh, I have some news about your grandmother's estate. The legal dispute has finally been resolved. You've inherited a substantial sum." James listened in stunned silence as the lawyer rattled off figures. It was more money than he'd ever imagined having. As he ended the call, James's mind was already racing with possibilities. He thought about the ideas he'd been mulling over for a new tech startup, one focused on cybersecurity. With this inheritance, he could make it a reality. Over the next few months, James threw himself into building his new company. He hired the best minds in the industry, developed cutting-edge security systems, and quickly gained a reputation as a rising star in the tech world. Contracts started rolling in, including some from major corporations. James found himself working long hours, but for the first time in a long time, he felt truly alive. He was building something meaningful, something that could help protect others from the kind of digital vulnerabilities he'd exploited in his revenge against Gregory. As his business thrived, James couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought him here. The pain of betrayal had been transformed into a driving force, propelling him to heights he'd never imagined possible. And Victoria? Last he'd heard, she was struggling to maintain even a shadow of her former lifestyle. The modest apartment she now called home was a far cry from the luxurious house they'd once shared. James Kavanaugh stood across the street from a modest apartment building, his eyes fixed on a particular window on the third floor. Behind that window lived Victoria, his ex-wife, now struggling to maintain even a semblance of her former lifestyle. But James wasn't here to reminisce or gloat. He was here on business. "So, this is the place?" asked the realtor standing beside him. James nodded. "Yes, I'll take it. But I don't want to buy. Let's discuss a long-term lease." The realtor looked confused. "A lease? But, sir, with your resources, surely purchasing would be more." "A lease," James repeated firmly. "And I'll need some renovations done. Specifically, I want the entire street-facing wall converted into a high-tech, interactive display." The realtor's eyes widened as James outlined his plans. When he finished, she stammered, "Mr. Kavanaugh, it seems rather unusual." James allowed himself a small, cold smile. "Let's get the paperwork started." Over the next few weeks, the building across from Victoria's apartment underwent a dramatic transformation. The entire facade was converted into a massive, state-of-the-art digital billboard. But this was no ordinary advertisement space. Every week, the display changed, each iteration more personal and damning than the last. One week, it played carefully edited clips from the spa tub surveillance video on a loop. The next, it displayed blown-up text messages between Victoria and Gregory, their betrayal laid bare for all to see. As time went on, the content became even more specific. Snippets from the divorce proceedings, bank statements showing Victoria's dwindling finances. Each display was a stark reminder of her fall from grace, impossible to ignore every time she left her apartment. From his office across town, James monitored the billboard impact through discreet cameras. He watched as Victoria's composure crumbled day by day. She started leaving her apartment less and less, clearly rattled by the constant, evolving reminder of her mistakes. The billboard became the talk of the neighborhood. Passers-by would stop and stare, pointing and whispering. Victoria's attempts to have it removed all failed. James had ensured every legal base was covered. As weeks turned into months, James observed the toll his psychological warfare was taking. Victoria's once vibrant social life withered away. Friends stopped visiting. She lost weight, her appearance growing haggard and unkempt on the rare occasions she ventured outside. James felt no joy in watching her suffer, no sense of triumph or satisfaction. This wasn't about happiness for him. It was about justice, cold and unrelenting. While the billboard continued its relentless assault on Victoria's psyche, James focused on expanding his business empire. His cybersecurity startup had taken off beyond his wildest expectations, securing contracts with major corporations and government agencies. It was at a tech conference in San Francisco that James met Emily Hawthorne. She was presenting a keynote on global scaling strategies for tech startups, and her insights immediately caught James's attention. After her talk, James approached her. "Ms. Hawthorne, James Kavanaugh, I found your presentation fascinating." Emily smiled, her brown eyes warm and intelligent. "Mr. Kavanaugh, I've heard a lot about your work in cybersecurity. It's impressive how quickly you've established yourself in the field." They fell into an easy conversation, discussing industry trends and sharing experiences. James found himself drawn to Emily's sharp mind and grounded perspective. She had a way of cutting through the noise and getting to the heart of complex issues. As the conference progressed, James and Emily spent more time together. They attended sessions, debated new technologies, and shared late-night conversations over coffee. James found himself opening up to her in a way he hadn't with anyone in years. "You've been through a lot," Emily said one evening after James had shared some of his past. "But look at what you built from it. That's truly remarkable, James." Her words stayed with him, sparking a realization. He had focused so much on his revenge, on tearing down those who had wronged him, that he neglected to fully appreciate what he'd created in the process. Inspired by this new perspective, James began to shift his focus. He started mentoring young entrepreneurs, sharing his experiences and insights. He hosted workshops and seminars, becoming a respected figure not just in the tech community, but in his local area as well. As his public profile grew, so did his relationship with Emily. They began dating, their shared experiences in the tech world providing a strong foundation. Emily's empathy and emotional intelligence balanced James's more analytical approach, helping him process the lingering pain from his past betrayal. Meanwhile, across town, Charlotte was undergoing her own transformation. Inspired by James's resilience and success, she channeled her pain into advocacy. She established a foundation to support women navigating the legal and emotional challenges of divorce, especially in cases involving betrayal. "I want to help others find the strength I found," Charlotte told James over lunch one day, "to show them that there's life after betrayal, that they can rebuild and thrive." James nodded, a sense of pride washing over him. They had both come so far from those dark days of discovery and heartbreak. Just as James was settling into his new life, balancing his thriving business with his mentorship programs and his deepening relationship with Emily, a new threat emerged. It started with a series of minor security breaches in his company's systems. At first, James dismissed them as routine hacking attempts. But as the attacks grew more sophisticated and targeted, a pattern emerged. "It's Gregory," James told Emily one night, his voice tight with tension. "He's trying to take down my business." Emily's brow furrowed with concern. "I thought he was still dealing with legal troubles." James nodded. "He is. But this reeks of desperation. It's his last attempt to strike back at me." But James had anticipated this move. In the years since his divorce, he had poured his expertise into developing state-of-the-art cybersecurity measures. His company's defenses were virtually impenetrable. As Gregory's attacks intensified, James and his team worked tirelessly to repel them. Not only did they successfully defend against every incursion, but they also managed to trace the attacks back to their source. With the evidence in hand, James didn't hesitate. He turned everything over to the authorities, providing them with a detailed record of Gregory's cyber attacks. The legal consequences were swift and severe. Already on thin ice from his previous financial crimes, Gregory now faced additional charges of cyber terrorism. The court showed no mercy. James sat in the courtroom, his face impassive as the judge delivered the verdict. Gregory Stern, once a titan of industry, was sentenced to a significant prison term for his crimes. As Gregory was led away in handcuffs, his eyes met James's for a brief moment. In that look, James saw the final crumbling of the man who had once seemed so powerful, so untouchable. Outside the courthouse, Emily took James's hand. "It's over," she said softly. "Really over this time?" James nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "Yes, it is." As they walked away from the courthouse, James reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. The betrayal, the pain, the cold fury that had driven him for so long. It all seemed distant now, like a story that had happened to someone else. He had not only avenged the wrongs done to him, but had built something meaningful in the process. His company was thriving, his relationship with Emily was strong and supportive, and he had found a new purpose in mentoring the next generation of entrepreneurs. James squeezed Emily's hand, a genuine smile spreading across his face. For the first time in years, he felt truly free. Free from the shadows of his past. Free to embrace the future he had fought so hard to create. The game was over, and James had won, not just by defeating his enemies, but by becoming something more than he ever thought possible.
Mr. Thomas, a retired school teacher in the small town of Millbrook, spent his days tending his garden and volunteering at the local soup kitchen. Despite his fulfilling routine, he felt a lingering emptiness. One stormy evening, he encountered Alex, a 12-year-old boy playing a broken guitar for spare change. Alex, having fled an abusive home, was hesitant but accepted Mr. Thomas's offer of shelter. Over time, they formed a deep bond, with Mr. Thomas enrolling Alex in school and supporting his musical talent. Through guidance and encouragement, Alex overcame his past and excelled. eventually being discovered by a talent scout. 5 years later, Alex dedicated his first concert to Mr. Thomas, sharing their inspiring story with the audience. Alex's success led him to create a foundation for homeless children, mirroring the kindness he received. In the end, Alex and Mr. Thomas reflected on their journey, content and proud. Hello, my friends. I hope all you are fine. This is Narrative Stories channel. Let's start this story. Mr. Thomas, a retired school teacher, spent his days in the serene small town of Millbrook, where life moved at a gentle pace. Each morning, he would tend to his lush garden, where vibrant flowers and well-kept vegetables stood testament to his meticulous care. The rest of his day was dedicated to volunteering at the local soup kitchen, where his warm, welcoming presence provided comfort to those in need. Despite his fulfilling routine, Mr. Thomas couldn't help but feel a lingering sense of emptiness, a subtle void in his otherwise content life. On the other side of town, 12-year-old Alex navigated the harsh streets, his broken guitar his only companion. The guitar, though worn and battered, was his lifeline, a source of solace amidst the chaos of his existence. Alex had fled from an abusive home, seeking refuge in the anonymity of the streets. He spent his days playing music for spare change, his soulful melodies a stark contrast to the bleakness of his surroundings. Alex's eyes, although weary, held a spark of hope, a dream that someday his music might lead him to a better life. One stormy evening, as the rain poured relentlessly, Mr. Thomas spotted a small figure huddled under a bridge. The boy, drenched and shivering, clutched his guitar tightly. Compassion stirred within Mr. Thomas. Without a second thought, he approached Alex, offering a warm meal and shelter for the night. Alex hesitated, his eyes filled with suspicion, but the genuine kindness in Mr. Thomas's voice eventually broke through his defenses. That night, for the first time in months, Alex slept in a warm bed, a sense of safety washing over him. In the weeks that followed, Alex's wariness slowly began to dissolve. Mr. Thomas's unwavering kindness and patience fostered an atmosphere of trust. They spent hours talking, sharing stories of their lives. Alex learned about Mr. Thomas's years as a teacher, while Mr. Thomas discovered Alex's extraordinary musical talent. Every evening, Alex would play his guitar, and Mr. Thomas would listen, offering gentle praise and encouragement. A bond formed between them, deeper than mere friendship. It was a connection born out of mutual respect and care. Recognizing Alex's potential, Mr. Thomas took steps to secure a brighter future for him. He enrolled Alex in school, ensuring he received a proper education. Understanding the importance of nurturing Alex's musical gift, Mr. Thomas bought him a new guitar and arranged for private music lessons. The structured environment and consistent support allowed Alex to thrive. With each passing day, his confidence grew and his skills improved. The boy who once played for spare change now had the opportunity to chase his dreams. The journey was not without its challenges. Alex grappled with self-doubt and the haunting memories of his past. There were moments when the weight of his experiences seemed too much to bear. However, Mr. Thomas stood by him, offering wisdom and unwavering support. He taught Alex the value of perseverance and the strength that comes from overcoming adversity. Through this guidance, Alex learned to channel his emotions into his music, transforming his pain into powerful, moving performances. The growth he experienced was profound, both as a musician and as a person. 5 years later, Alex had become a remarkable young man. He excelled in school, earning accolades for both his academic achievements and his musical talent. His performances at local events garnered attention, and his reputation as a gifted musician began to spread. Alex's hard work and dedication paid off when a talent scout discovered him during a local music festival. The opportunity was a turning point, a chance to step onto a larger stage and share his gift with the world. Recognizing Alex's potential, Mr. Thomas took steps to secure a brighter future for him. He enrolled Alex in school, ensuring he received a proper education. Understanding the importance of nurturing Alex's musical gift, Mr. Thomas bought him a new guitar and arranged for private music lessons. The structured environment and consistent support allowed Alex to thrive. With each passing day, his confidence grew and his skills improved. The boy who once played for spare change now had the opportunity to chase his dreams. The journey was not without its challenges. Alex grappled with self-doubt and the haunting memories of his past. There were moments when the weight of his experiences seemed too much to bear. However, Mr. Thomas stood by him, offering wisdom and unwavering support. He taught Alex the value of perseverance and the strength that comes from overcoming adversity. Through this guidance, Alex learned to channel his emotions into his music, transforming his pain into powerful, moving performances. The growth he experienced was profound, both as a musician and as a person. 5 years later, Alex had become a remarkable young man. He excelled in school, earning accolades for both his academic achievements and his musical talent. His performances at local events garnered attention, and his reputation as a gifted musician began to spread. Alex's hard work and dedication paid off when a talent scout discovered him during a local music festival. The opportunity was a turning point, a chance to step onto a larger stage and share his gift with the world. Alex was offered a record deal and the chance to perform at a prestigious concert hall. The preparation was intense, but Alex approached it with the same determination that had carried him through his hardships. He practiced tirelessly, fine-tuning every note and perfecting his performance. On the night of his debut concert, the anticipation was palpable. The concert hall buzzed with excitement, the audience eager to witness the young prodigy's first major performance. As Alex took the stage, he felt a surge of emotion. Standing before the crowd, he dedicated his performance to Mr. Thomas, the man who had changed his life. He shared their story, his voice filled with gratitude and love. The audience listened in rapt silence, moved by the tale of kindness and redemption. When Alex began to play, his music resonated with a depth and passion that captivated everyone present. The concert was a resounding success, marking the beginning of Alex's promising career. After the concert, Alex and Mr. Thomas shared a quiet moment backstage. They reflected on their journey, the challenges they had overcome, and the bond they had forged. There were tears of joy and pride, a testament to the profound impact they had on each other's lives. Mr. Thomas, once a lonely retiree, had found purpose in helping Alex, while Alex had discovered a family and a future through Mr. Thomas's kindness. Inspired by Mr. Thomas's generosity, Alex decided to give back to the community that had once been his refuge. He established a foundation dedicated to helping homeless children through music. The foundation provided instruments, lessons, and support, offering hope to those who needed it most. Alex's efforts mirrored the compassion he had received, creating a legacy of kindness and opportunity. The story concludes with a serene scene in Mr. Thomas's garden. Alex and Mr. Thomas sit side by side, the golden light of the setting sun casting a warm glow around them. Alex strums his guitar, the notes carrying a sense of peace and fulfillment. They are content, proud of their journey, and the lives they have touched. The garden, once a symbol of Mr. Thomas's solitude, now blooms with the joy and love they have cultivated together. Thank you for being a part of Narrative Stories. Your support and engagement mean the world to us. We are committed to bringing you the best in storytelling. What kinds of stories would you like to see next? Share your thoughts in the comments below.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
When I discovered that my wife of 6 years had cheated on me twice and was planning to do it again, I was completely devastated. I had heard about the overwhelming emotions that hit when someone realizes their marriage is a lie, but nothing prepared me for it. My marriage, the life I thought I had, turned out to be a sham. The emotions flooded in, hitting me like Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. My internal levee broke, and the waves of pain and betrayal engulfed everything I had been with her. I cried hard, When the flood of tears finally stopped, there was nothing left. Nothing I could recognize, nothing I could salvage. The trust? Gone. The respect? Gone. Admiration, caring, sexual attraction? All gone. The love I thought we shared had been wiped out. It was like looking at pictures of the aftermath of a hurricane. No solid ground to rebuild on, just devastation so overwhelming that you want to walk away. And that's exactly what I was going to do with my marriage. Give up and walk away. She had torn it apart, spun it until there was nothing left but unrecognizable debris. It was over. Kathy and I had a fight that day. Nothing out of the ordinary at first, but it turned ugly fast. She had been pushing me to refurnish our living room, saying the furniture was old and she was tired of it. I told her the furniture wasn't old. It was barely 2 years old and had cost a lot of money. I wasn't about to spend that kind of cash again so soon. She kept pushing, saying she was sick of it and wanted something new. I made the mistake of escalating the argument by saying, "I suppose you're sick of me too, huh? Want to go screw someone else because you're tired of me? Why can't you just be happy with what you have?" And then she fired back, "Well, maybe I should go screw someone else. Maybe then you'd realize what you have and what you could lose." Of course, I didn't let that one go either and yelled, "Well, you decide what you want out of life, Kathy, and just go for it. But don't expect me to be here waiting for you when you come back." Then she drove a spike in me when she said, "I guess I should have married Roger instead of you. Maybe he wouldn't have been such a cheap bum like you are." That did it. I literally screamed at her, "Screw you and screw him too. I don't ever want to hear his name brought up again. And you are not getting new furniture, no matter what you do or say." End of discussion. I stormed out of the house and drove to the club for a few beers. I was furious and I needed time to cool off before I talked to her again. Roger was my all-time arch-rival. He was the golden boy of our community. Everything he touched went his way with one exception. He touched my wife years ago, but she was in love with me and married me and not him. They dated a few times during a short period when she and I had broken up. He had his sights set on her and almost succeeded, but not quite. She did marry me. I worked my butt off in my job and made a very respectable living. In fact, more than respectable. Roger looked at a project, and it started making him money. I was in business for years, and my reputation grew steadily because of hard work and honesty. Everyone just assumed that Roger was reputable and trustworthy. He never had to prove himself. Was I jealous? No, I wasn't jealous of his business position. I was raised to work hard and be honest and reliable, and I would never be jealous of someone's success. But I was a bit sensitive of him when it came to Kathy. I would always remember that she had gone out with him, that he had touched her. It was about 2 hours later, right around 9 p.m., and my cell phone rang. I looked at the number, and it was my home phone number. I decided to let it go to my voicemail rather than talk to her at the moment because I was still pretty steamed, and on top of that I had a few under my belt, and figured I might just say something I would regret later. A short time later I retrieved my voicemail and listened to her message. "Ben, I called to tell you I was sorry for the things I said to you earlier. I guess you don't care enough to take my call though because you had to see it was me calling. Since you aren't coming home, I guess I will just go out for a while myself. See you later." That really cut it. I had started to come around after our argument, but now I was angry all over again. I got myself another beer and downed it in a couple of minutes, and then went looking for her. I cruised through every bar parking lot in town and didn't see her car. I finally thought that maybe she had gone out with someone else, so I drove over to her best friend Nancy's house, and sure enough, there was her car parked in front of Nancy's house. I walked up to the front door and knocked. In about a minute, Nathan, Nancy's husband, came to the door and asked me, "How are things with you, Ben? I hear you and Kathy had a little argument tonight." "They are not here. They decided to do a bit of bar hopping tonight at the last minute." "Well, Nathan, I didn't see Kathy's car at the bars, so I figured maybe she was here with Nancy. Can you tell me what car Nancy is driving so I can go look for them? She has the expedition tonight. I think they were going to start out at Bachelor's and work their way back toward here," he added. I left and drove straight to Bachelor's, and sure enough, Nancy's excursion was in the parking lot. I thought about going right in and confronting Kathy, but I was still a bit buzzed from all the beer and thought it might be better if I just sat in the car for a while and sobered up before we had it out again. A few minutes after 11 p.m. they came out and got in Nancy's car and left the parking lot. I followed at a safe distance, and as Nathan had said, they drove to the Down the Hill bar and went in. I again sat in the parking lot for a while, just keeping an eye on things. I figured that it wouldn't be too long before they headed for the next place, and I wasn't wrong. At exactly 11:30 p.m., they drove to what I figured would be the next and last stop of the night, Fuzzy's Pub at the Ramada Plaza Hotel. Midnight rolled around and Nancy came out of the hotel and got into her car and drove away. What is this? I asked myself. Just how foolish was Kathy going to be here? Was she going to do something stupid? I knew I had to find out. I got a baseball cap and my team shirt out of the trunk and put them on as some form of a disguise. Now I wasn't totally sobered up yet, so my disguise was less than perfect. You see, my name was on the shirt. I didn't figure anyone would pay that close of attention to it though, so I knew it was better than no disguise at all. Minutes later, I worked my way into Fuzzy's and found an out-of-the-way spot where I could observe things. That is when I saw Kathy with Roger. That a-hole. She was with Roger. They were at a booth against the back wall of the bar, about as far out of the way as you could get. I noticed that there was an empty booth right behind Kathy, so I moved toward it with as much caution as I could muster. I needn't have worried. The two of them were so engrossed in conversation that they wouldn't have noticed a water buffalo getting into that booth. From where I was seated, I could hear their entire conversation, except the couple of times when he must have leaned forward to kiss her and whispered to her. "Thanks for coming, Roger. I didn't want to have to keep Nancy out all night," she said. "No problem," Roger said. "You know I love it when you and Ben have a fight. That is the only time you let me have a piece of you. 7 years ago, you two split up and I got to screw you for a while, and twice more since you have been married. I am perfectly happy to give you another revenge sex tonight too. I wish you two would fight more often than you do." "Well," she said, "you know I love him to death, but when he pisses me off like tonight, I can't help myself. I need a revenge sex just so he doesn't win." As I listened to this conversation, the realization that she had cheated on me 2 times in the past 6 years of our marriage and was planning on doing it again tonight drove me to the condition I was in when I started telling you this story. She could say anything she wanted to say about loving me to death, but her actions proved otherwise. She screwed Roger to get even with me, to keep me from winning, as she put it. That is not love. That is a selfish, uncaring woman, and it caused all the changes I mentioned. Right or wrong, it destroyed me and my love. Don't tell me I am stupid because I won't listen. It is what it is, and I knew I didn't love her anymore. Oh, I cried over the loss, but it was over. I waited for a while, wondering how long it would be before they headed for a room. It wasn't long before I heard him say, "Well, Kathy, you ready for my big Johnny?" I could almost see the grin on her face. I knew it would be there because I had heard the words. She spoke to him. "I am all ready for you," she said. Then she laughed. "I might even take it home and let Ben have sloppy seconds with me tonight. He will be so drunk that he won't even know the difference." Roger roared with that one. "Man, I would like nothing better than to send a cream pie home to dear sweet Ben." Lucky for them, they got up and headed for the elevators. I was ready to kill. Maybe it was lucky for me because I think I actually may have done some serious damage to them. A short time later, I followed them into the lobby. I couldn't tell what floor they had stopped on, so I went to the house phone and asked for Roger Brown's room. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up, and I said with a slurred voice, "Is this room 112? He replied, "No, this isn't 112. What the hell are you doing calling this room at this hour?" And he hung up. I asked them to call his room for me again, and when he picked up, I said, "Well, I thought this was 112, say. You were trying to fool me, and it is 112, isn't it? You dumb drunken a-hole. This isn't room 113, it's 214, and if you call here again, I am going to have the manager call the police." He slammed the phone down. Now who is calling me a hole anyway? Seems to me the dumb scumsucker is the guy who just gave a furious and dangerous husband the room number where his is going to screw the wife. I rode the elevator to the 4th floor and walked down the hall to room 214. I listened at the door until I heard them in the heat of it, and then I pounded on the door. I heard him yell, "Now what the hell?" And I actually got a big kick out of that because I knew I would soon destroy his sex party. I stood back from the peephole so he couldn't see me, and when he opened the door a crack, I slammed it in so hard that the security chain burst off the door jamb and the door flew open. There on the bed was my beautiful cheating wife, naked as the day she was born. When I burst through the door, she screamed and her face turned totally white. I am surprised she didn't pass out. "Oh God, no. Oh God, no." Roger finally got over the shock of me breaking through the door and yelled at me, "Ben, get your butt out of my room. I am going to call security. Remember what I said about dumb idiot?" Well, I hit the dumb idiot with one well-placed punch to his solar plexus, and down he went. There were several minutes when he did not move at all. I would have no more trouble with him. "Kathy, you lying, cheating 304. I know everything. I heard all of the crap you told him, and now I know it all. Don't bother to come home tonight. It would be a big mistake." "Oh God, no, Ben. Let me come home. I can explain. This means nothing to me. I love you." "Oh God, no. You heard me, you 304. Don't make the second biggest mistake of your life and come home. It will not turn out well for you. And yes, you can take that as a threat." I turned and walked out the door. I was actually surprised that I could be as calm as I was. I had wanted to kill them both minutes earlier, and taking only one punch at the dumb idiot showed unbelievable control on my part. I know I was pretty abusive in my language to her, but it could have been much worse. When I got in my car, I got in and just sat there for a while trying to calm myself even more. I also figured I would wait around for a few minutes just to see if the police would show up or if Kathy would leave with Roger. After about 15 minutes, Roger came out of the hotel and got in a vehicle and left. A few minutes after he left, Nancy showed up again and Kathy came out and got into the excursion. I was at least glad that the two of them hadn't stayed in the hotel room to screw after I left. It isn't as if the damage had not already been done, but that would have added insult upon injury or fuel to the fire, as they say. That gave me an idea. I drove home and went to bed. I don't even know what time it was that the phone rang and caller ID showed it was Nancy. Ben, I know you were upset with Kathy and don't want her to come home, but I wanted to call you and tell you that she is staying with Nathan, and I so you wouldn't worry about her. Nancy, I wasn't going to worry about her anymore. I don't care about her anymore. You needn't have woken me up. What time is it anyway? It's 3 a.m., Ben, and you can't tell me you don't care. I know you love Kathy, and she loves you. She is here, and she is crying her eyes out over how stupid she was tonight, and she wants you to forgive her and let her come home. Nancy, she can't come home. Ask her if her stupidity goes back to the other 2 times she screwed Roger before tonight. Oh God, no, Nancy said as I hung up the phone. I guess she didn't know about the other times Kathy had screwed that a-hole. I am fortunate in that I am not one to get huge hangovers, and besides I had quit drinking quite early in the evening, so even though I was very tired, I was up and about by 8 a.m. By 10 a.m., I was ready for my confrontation with Kathy. I called Nancy's house and told her that Kathy could come home if she wanted to. I was standing out on the driveway when she pulled in a few minutes later. Nathan and Nancy had followed her home. I am sure they were there to make sure I didn't hurt her in any way. When Kathy got out of her car, her eyes were quite wide as she asked me, Ben, what is all of that in the front yard? Kathy, that is everything I could think of in this house that would remind you of me. Everything you have ever given to me. Everything I have ever given to you. It is all of the pictures of our courtship and our 6 years of married life. I cannot think of one thing left in the house that will remind you of me. I even put the old furniture out here so you could go out and buy new like you wanted. And the last thing is this, and I held up our wedding picture. I walked over to the end table that used to sit alongside my chair, also on the pile, and set the picture on it. I walked the few paces back to the driveway and dropped a lighted match into the trail of gasoline I had poured out to the driveway. It lit, and the flames quickly retraced my steps back to the pile of memories of me. It wasn't long before the whole pile was engulfed in flames. That was one hell of a bonfire. There was little left except for ashes and burned-out furniture framing. I looked over at Kathy, who was obviously in shock, and said, You and Kathy, I heard you tell Roger that you didn't ever want me to win. I hope it was all worth it. Our marriage is over. You can have everything else. I want nothing from this marriage. I only hope that I won't remember you either. You will be hearing from my attorney. Minutes later, as I heard the sound of sirens approaching from down the street, and a police squad car drove up and 2 officers came over to ask what had happened. It was a couple of minutes later that the fire department arrived to put out what was left of the smoldering mass. The gasoline had done its work, and the pile had been reduced to charred rubble in minutes. This is just me destroying the remnants of a marriage in ruins, officers. I am sorry for the trouble I have caused. Needless to say, they took me into custody. As I was ushered into the squad car, I glanced at Kathy and could see her sobbing. I spent a couple of days in jail, and they had a psychiatrist evaluate my sanity. Surprisingly, they discovered that I was sane. Saddened and destroyed, but sane. I think they would have let me out sooner, but they wanted to observe me for a couple of days, just to be certain. I did make bail, and went to pick up my car from my office parking lot. All of the items I had wanted to keep were in the car. It was mainly my clothing and a few other personal items. I drove to the closest motel and got myself a room for a few days until I could locate an apartment to rent. A few weeks later, I was completely settled in and had started to move on with my life. My court case came up and I went and pled guilty to all charges and was fined $5,000 in court costs. That was a small price to pay to wipe out my ruined marriage. Kathy contested the divorce and kept leaving me voice messages on my cell phone. She was begging me to talk to her, to forgive her because it meant nothing to her, to take her back. I left one message on our home phone when I knew she would be at work. I said, Kathy, you tell me it meant nothing to you, but it meant everything to me. Do you understand? It meant everything to me. Goodbye. I never heard from her again. The divorce did go through, and I gave her everything she wanted. I just wanted to be done with her. Roger's wife got wind of the whole thing and divorced him and really took him to the cleaners. Apparently, Kathy wasn't the only wife that Roger consoled when they fought with their husbands. A couple of weeks after I barged into his hotel room and caught him with my wife, I ran into Roger at Fuzzy's. I think I must have surprised him because he didn't have time to get up and escape. I leaned on his shoulder as he sat on a bar stool, and I told him that I was pretty sure if he hung around town, he was bound to have some kind of serious accident someday. When his divorce was final, he started liquidating what was left of his holdings, and before too long his absence from town was obvious. Strangely, not too many people really missed him all that much. Well, I actually had hoped he would stick around town. I run into Kathy around town once in a while, and every time she tells me how sorry she is and asks if I will call her to talk, I just nod and walk away, and to this day I have not called her, but she keeps asking. Who knows, maybe someday I will call her. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
I grew up in a small Midwest town, surrounded by endless fields and a close-knit community. My childhood was a mix of ordinary days and extraordinary dreams. My parents, though not wealthy, instilled in me a sense of ambition and discipline. My dad was a veteran who shared stories of resilience, and my mom was a nurturing force who held our family together. High school was where I began shaping my identity. I excelled in math and science, dreaming of becoming an engineer. My best friend Jace and I spent countless hours sketching out imaginary machines and planning our futures. He was the bold one, always pushing boundaries, while I preferred the safety of clear rules and steady goals. After graduation, life took us in unexpected directions. Jace joined the military while I pursued engineering in college, but financial challenges and youthful mistakes led me to a crossroads, and I found myself enlisting as well. The Army became a crucible, forging me into someone stronger but also more guarded. By the time I returned home, I was a changed man. The innocence of my youth had been replaced by the weight of experience. I channeled my energy into education, eventually securing a job at GM where I met Sally. She was a light in my life, someone who brought color to the grayness that had settled over me. Together we built a life, a family, and a home, something I thought was unshakable. Awareness seeped back into me gradually, as though I were emerging from a thick fog. The dim glow of the basement workshop, filtering through the gap in the door, seemed to mirror my mood. Beyond the wooden divider, a racket sat firmly clamped in its vise, a remnant of my earlier work session. I could hear our youngest two kids playing and the Disney movie they were watching in the rec room. Sitting in my old chair, I glanced at the clock. I'd been there for over half an hour, lost in thought, trying to block out whatever I didn't want to hear. Dinner was done. Sally cleaned up while I headed to the basement to reglue some rackets for the fall racquetball leagues. I'd been playing for years, usually in the A bracket, and I took pride in my skills and fitness. At 6'2" and about 200 pounds, I kept in good shape despite the demands of my engineering job at GM. Our 7-year-old daughter, Jessie, followed me down to watch a movie with her younger sister, Allie. At this age, Allie always tagged along with Jessie. I couldn't help but wonder how things would change as Jessie grew up. Our 9-year-old son, Jason, was the oldest and usually retreated to his room to build model airplanes. I finished the handles on my 3 rackets and pulled the strings tighter, preparing for a potential mid-game break. Checking on the girls, I saw they were absorbed in Lady and the Tramp, so I decided to head upstairs. As I climbed the stairs, I overheard Sally talking on the phone. I briefly considered surprising her, setting the mood for later, even though we'd already shared some time together that morning. But when I peeked through the door, I heard Sally giggling. I froze. That laugh was different. Familiar, but unsettling. Then I heard her whisper, "Sure would like to try that thing again before the wart comes off." That strange comment triggered a memory from a conversation I'd had in a bar a couple of months ago. I suddenly felt dizzy and collapsed on the basement stairs, shutting the door behind me. Sally continued laughing, her voice dropping lower. I could catch only a few words. "Last time I was really on a roll. I can't wait." I didn't want her to know I was there, so I quietly retreated to my workshop, reflecting on the conversation. It reminded me of a night after a racquetball match when I had been at the bar with John and Craig. After discussing the game, the conversation shifted to women. I noticed that John and Craig seemed unusually interested in my marriage. Though they weren't trying to flirt, their probing questions made me uncomfortable, and I'd left early a few times to avoid the topic. That night, Craig was teasing John about his wife Mary, insisting he get a personal surgery. I assumed it was a vasectomy and mentioned that Sally had talked about having me get one, but we hadn't agreed yet. Craig kept smirking while John looked distressed. "Oh no, she wants him to remove the wart," Craig said, laughing. I was confused. "What's going on?" I asked. John blushed and explained he had a wart in a private spot. He'd seen it grow over the years, and now Mary wanted it removed. John wasn't so much concerned about the money as he was about losing his advantage in attracting other women, as the wart seemed to be a topic of interest. Realizing I wasn't comfortable with their conversation, I decided to leave. Now, sitting in the dark, I couldn't believe Sally could be involved in something like what her phone call suggested. Sally knew John and Craig from racquetball, but I didn't think they'd ever met her. The pieces started connecting, and I couldn't ignore the possibility that something was going on. Sweating, I hoped there was a logical explanation, but Debbie, Sally's boss, was clearly involved. Debbie had been with the company for 5 years and had become a close friend to Sally. They'd bonded when both were pregnant, and over time their families socialized a few times, though we were never close. John and Craig had joined the Wise Racquetball League a couple of years ago. Despite similar family situations, we only socialized at games or afterward over beers, never with our families. It wasn't until recently, when I mentioned the store where Sally worked, that I learned Debbie was an acquaintance of John and Craig. They had attended the same high school, and John mentioned they saw each other a couple of times a year. About 2 years ago, when Allie was in the midst of the terrible twos, Sally had been struggling. Jessie went to daycare, and I was working extra hours. One night, Sally broke down from exhaustion, and after comforting her, I offered to take full responsibility for the kids on her next day off so she could get a break. She thanked me and said she'd think about it. A couple of weeks later, Sally said she'd talked to Debbie about needing a break. Debbie suggested a shopping trip to upscale malls in Detroit. Though I had reservations, I agreed. Sally and Debbie left on a Saturday morning, checked into a motel, had dinner, and saw a movie. I insisted on getting the hotel info, which she provided. The next day, they checked out, went to another mall, and returned home by 5 p.m. Sally was grateful for the trip and hugged me when she got home, sharing all the details. She hadn't gone overboard shopping, but bought a few nice things for herself and the kids. I was glad she had a good time, and the kids were well behaved, so I had no complaints. Over 2 years ago, after Sally's first shopping trip with Debbie, it became a regular thing. Every few months, they'd leave Saturday morning and return late Sunday. I didn't mind much. I enjoyed time with the kids, and Sally seemed happy. I couldn't recall any major changes at first, but after the second trip, Sally returned in a different mood, sullen and a bit nervous. When I asked, she said it was nothing, just that her period had started. I recalled that since then, we hadn't been intimate on the nights she returned, but we always were a few days before she left. I hadn't thought much about it until now. Sally called me from the top of the stairs. "Phil, it's bath time for the girls. Can you send them up?" I sighed and went upstairs to gather them. I tried to stay calm, but emotions were building inside. When I returned, Sally was in the kitchen, flipping through a cookbook. She smiled, looked me in the eye, and asked, "Is something wrong, honey?" I mumbled about a cracked racket, but kept studying her, looking for signs. She seemed normal, just Sally, my wife. She kissed me and mentioned Debbie had called to plan another shopping trip. When she said it, her eyes narrowed and she quickly looked away. I knew something was off, and I wondered how long this had been going on. I tried to change the subject. "Do we have anything planned for next weekend?" I asked. She said there was nothing on the calendar. I suggested a VFW event on Saturday, but she wasn't interested. "I don't care if your dad goes," she said. "I'm not going. It bores me to tears." I pushed, suggesting a family trip to Cedar Point, but Sally got defensive. "We just took the kids to Mackinac Island. What's gotten into you, Phil? You've never minded me shopping before." I grew frustrated and said, "Never mind. I just thought we could do something together." She walked away, saying, "You and Debbie are having fun. I'll go check on the kids." That night, I pretended to sleep, but I couldn't stop thinking. I heard Sally come to bed and whisper my name, but I stayed still. Eventually, she rolled away and I lay awake, reflecting on everything. I thought about my childhood, growing up just a few miles from where we live now. I had a normal, middle-class family, my parents and older sister. My best friend Jace lived a block away. We were inseparable. He was the outgoing, life-of-the-party type, and I was quieter, more thoughtful. We spent our youth playing sports, chasing girls, and in the end, both lost our virginity before prom. In high school, I started taking drafting classes and decided to become an engineer. Jace wasn't sure what he wanted, but we both enrolled in community college. After my first year, I had a big mistake. I got arrested for drunk driving after a party and spent the night in jail. My parents bailed me out and they were furious. After everything, I spent all my savings on fines, court fees, and lost my driver's license for a year. For the rest of the semester, I rode my moped, giving Jace rides. Eventually, I gave up on school. It felt pointless without a license or money. The next year, I enlisted in the Army, hoping my drafting skills would land me an engineering job and keep me out of Vietnam. The recruiter lied, of course. Jace decided to join me, and we enlisted as buddies, guaranteed to train together. Basic training was tough but manageable. During aptitude tests, the Army decided we'd make good fire control specialists, which meant operating a high-tech calculator to help artillery hit targets. Afterward, we were sent to Fort Sill for more training. It wasn't great, but Jace and I had fun. A few weeks before graduation, we received orders for Vietnam. After a short break at home, we flew to I Corps in Vietnam, where we were assigned to Battery A, 2nd Battalion, 11th Artillery. It was November 1969, and Nixon was reducing troop numbers. For the first few months, there wasn't much combat, just a lot of flying and some occasional raids. The highlight of our tour was a wild vacation in Bangkok. Then, our unit was sent to a remote hill in the jungle, and things took a dark turn. 4 months later, I came home on a stretcher, and Jace was dead. I was mentally and physically broken. I spent weeks in the hospital and months in rehab. After being declared almost fit for duty, I returned to Fort Sill as an assistant instructor. I enrolled in college courses to keep busy, avoiding social interactions. After a year, I applied for early release from the Army and was accepted into an engineering program at a local university. I moved back in with my parents and lived on savings, education benefits, and a part-time job. I was a classic shell-shocked Vietnam vet, bitter, withdrawn, and struggling with my experiences. I grew a beard, wore old clothes, and kept to myself. I saw a therapist occasionally, but didn't feel it helped much. I visited Jace's parents regularly to talk about him. It was the least I could do. One day, while studying in the campus center, a woman approached and asked if she could sit with me. She had striking red hair and a pale complexion. I was immediately struck by her, but when she asked if I was a Vietnam vet, I flinched. I said yes, but left it at that. She mentioned her dad was a Korean War vet, and I relaxed a bit. We talked for a while until she had to leave for class. A couple of days later, she returned and asked if she could sit with me again. This time I was more composed, and we chatted like old friends. Eventually, she realized she didn't know my name, so I introduced myself. "Phil Robinson," I said. "Sally Baxter," she replied, laughing. And just like that, I met Sally. It turned out that Sally and I had long breaks between classes on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Over the next few weeks, we spent most of those breaks together. She shared almost everything about her life, family, friends, career plans, and I was fascinated by her outgoing social personality. She reminded me a lot of Jace. I told her about my family and classes, but avoided talking about the Army. I preferred to listen to her. Her voice could have read me the phone book, and I'd still be interested. Slowly, I started taking better care of myself, shaving, getting a haircut, and dressing better. My mom noticed and teased me, but she was clearly happy for me. A few weeks in, I finally asked her out. She agreed right away, but warned, "My dad can be tough on guys who ask me out." I told her, "If dating you means dealing with your dad, it's worth it." She blushed and called me a flatterer. That Friday, I knocked on her door and was greeted by her mother, Emily, who welcomed me warmly. Before I could say anything, she called, "Jack, Sally's beau is here." Emily introduced herself and we shook hands. Soon, Sally's father, Jack, appeared. He was big, about my height, but much heavier, and his presence was imposing. He shook my hand firmly and invited me into the family room. As we sat, I noticed military memorabilia, including a Marine Corps flag and an M1 Garand rifle displayed proudly above the fireplace. Jack, a Korean War veteran, mentioned his service and injuries, and I briefly shared that I was a Vietnam vet. We talked about military history, and Jack seemed skeptical, even dismissive of my role. He muttered about Vietnamization and the end of the war, but Emily tried to steer the conversation away from politics. Sally entered, and we quickly shifted topics to school. After a while, we said our goodbyes, and I took Sally out to dinner and a movie. The evening was mostly a blur, as I was so focused on her. We held hands, sitting so close that our heads almost touched. Afterward, we stopped by a bar for a drink, and I walked her to the door. I hesitated, unsure whether to kiss her, but she reached up, wrapped her arms around my neck, and whispered, "Thank you for a wonderful evening." Time seemed to stop as I looked into her eyes, realizing I had fallen in love with her. I kissed her gently, and from that moment on, We shared intimate moments like that, holding each other close, unable to hide our feelings. The next day, I called Sally, and we talked for an hour. We quickly made plans for another date, and just like that, we became exclusive. A few weeks later, when I mentioned booking a motel room for the weekend, she blushed, but smiled and nodded. The evening was everything I hoped for, though there were a few awkward moments when she noticed the scars from Vietnam. I reassured her that I was fine. I whispered, "Sally, I love you. I can't help it." She pulled back, tears in her eyes, and smiled. "I love you too, Phil. I never knew it could be like this." Relieved, I kissed her nose and said, "I want to do this again and again." That night was perfect. For the first time since losing Jace, I felt at peace. We talked about our future, marriage, kids, where to live. Sally was graduating soon, and I would follow a year later. We decided she'd work after graduation, and we'd marry when I finished school. In the meantime, I rented an apartment so we could be together. A week later, I introduced Sally to my parents. They hit it off right away, and my mom later told me she loved Sally for how she brought me out of my shell. I was happy again, smiling constantly, even to the point that my therapist kicked me out, telling me I didn't need his help anymore. Sally's father, Jack, and I had a tense relationship. He was protective, especially when we discussed living together before marriage. But things changed when Jack invited me over for a private conversation. After some small talk, Jack mentioned Sally had told him about my scars. I felt uncomfortable, but Jack understood. We briefly discussed my time in Vietnam, and I told him I had been at Ripcord in the summer of '70. To my surprise, Jack knew about it. After that, he treated me like family. Things moved quickly after that. Sally graduated with honors, got a job, and spent more time with me. Her parents, however, thought she should move in with me permanently. I graduated on time, got a job at General Motors, and 2 months later, we got married. We bought a small house, and a year later, our son Jason was born. 2 years after that, we had Jesse, and then Allison 3 years later. The birth of our kids changed everything. Sally worked part-time after Jason was born and planned to return full-time once the kids were older. Meanwhile, my work evolved as I transitioned into automated manufacturing. By the time Allison was born, I was part of a team learning about the first computer-aided design systems. Life was good. We had plenty of money, 2 cars, and a nice home. Over the years, we expanded with a new bedroom, bathroom, and rec room. We had 3 healthy, beautiful kids and took family vacations every year. Twice a year, Sally and I sent the kids to their grandparents for a long weekend. I always thought our marriage was strong. We loved each other openly, holding hands, hugging, and sharing affection. I often told Sally how lucky I was. But recently, I wasn't so sure anymore. Sleep became elusive, and I spent most nights staring at the wall, barely getting any rest. I skipped my usual morning workout and instead sat at my desk, trying to figure out what was going wrong. I couldn't ask Sally directly. If she was hiding something, she might not tell me the truth. I wasn't even sure what the truth was, but I had a sinking feeling that something was off. I loved Sally and the kids. The thought of losing them terrified me, but the idea that Sally might not love me anymore was even scarier. For days, I felt like a zombie, distracted and disconnected from everything. It wasn't until Jace mentioned my behavior that Sally noticed. I brushed it off as work stress. On Tuesday, I returned to my routine and played racquetball. John and Craig were there, as usual. I'd never seen one without the other, and something about their closeness started to unsettle me. They acted like they shared some secret, and when they smirked at me, I began to see them as rivals. We played a few casual games, but my mind was elsewhere. By Wednesday, I decided to check on their whereabouts. I called John's house, and his wife said he was going to a business conference in Detroit. When I called Craig's house, I got the same answer. My heart sank. I didn't need proof. This was it. I knew they'd met up together. But how far had it gone? I was furious. A voice inside me said, "Do something." That Friday, I stopped by my parents' house. They were renovating in preparation for a potential move to Florida, but I needed their support. After some small talk, I finally blurted out, "I think Sally is cheating on me." The words broke something inside me, and I cried for the first time. My parents were shocked. Mom whispered, "No, not Sally. She wouldn't do that to you." Dad asked, "Why do you think that?" I told them everything, what I had overheard, what I'd learned. Mom cried quietly, and Dad comforted her, asking, "What do you need from us?" "I need to know for sure. Can you take the kids tomorrow and keep them until Sunday? I have to be where they'll be tomorrow night." Dad hesitated, then agreed. "Sure, Phil, but I pray this is all a misunderstanding. Yeah, me too, I said, though I wasn't sure how it could be. I left feeling hollow, uncertain of what came next. When I got home, Sally was cheerfully finishing dinner. She greeted me with a hug and a kiss, saying, "The kids are in the break room. Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. She seemed preoccupied, practically buzzing with energy. It struck me that we hadn't been intimate since the previous Saturday, and we'd missed our usual midweek meeting. I'd been in a bad mood all week, taking sleeping pills to get through the nights, and Sally never mentioned it. I hesitated, then suggested, "How about we put the kids to bed early and have some time for ourselves tonight?" Sally stepped back, and her smile faltered. "I got my period early today," she said, clearly uncomfortable. I forced a smile. "Okay, I understand." She gently stroked my cheek and promised, "As soon as my period is over, I'll explain everything." I nodded, muttering, "Then it's a date." She hugged me and returned to cooking. I slowly headed upstairs, anger brewing inside me. I now knew she was saving herself for tomorrow's date. The voice in my head grew louder. Do something. At dinner, I struggled to hide my emotions. The kids chattered away, unaware. Could this be the last time we had dinner together as a family? The thought brought tears to my eyes. The next day, we followed our usual Saturday routine. The kids cleaned their rooms, then watched cartoons. I spent time in the garage until Sally was ready to leave. She came downstairs with her suitcase, reminding the kids to behave while she was gone. Allie clung to her, demanding she buy her something. Sally promised, kissed Allie goodbye, and left for the hotel. I watched her drive off, holding Allie in my arms. Once she was out of sight, I turned to the kids and told them we were going to Grandma and Grandpa's house for the night. They packed quickly and we headed out. At my parents' house, Dad gave me a concerned look. "Good luck, Phil. I hope you're wrong." "I hope so too," I replied. "Thanks for helping. I'll call you in the morning." I left, switching cars at Avis to avoid recognition. Back home, I sat in the kitchen, replaying the week's events. The phone finally rang around 1 a.m. It was Sally. "Is that you, Phil?" "Yeah, it's me. Is everything okay?" I asked with a touch of sarcasm. "We're fine. We stopped for lunch. We're in room 168, 555-645-0168, she replied, before rushing off. "Debbie's waving at me. We're spending the afternoon at Meadowbrook Shopping Center. I'll see you tomorrow." The phone clicked off without her saying, "I love you." That morning, she hadn't said it either. I dialed the Red Roof Inn, confirming Sally had checked in. I decided I wouldn't call her room. I'd see her later. I hung up, then dialed again. I called the Red Roof Inn again, asking if John Harrison was registered. They confirmed he was, but hadn't checked in yet. I said I'd call back later and hung up, trying to control the rising anger that felt like it could explode at any moment. I went into the workshop, unlocked the tool cabinet, and stood staring at my dad's old rifle. I thought about taking one with me, but the idea of never seeing my kids again stopped me. Instead, I grabbed a beat-up shoebox from the drawer and pulled out a sea knife I'd bought in Bangkok. I strapped it to my calf, then gathered a few things, driving gloves, water, candy bars, and headed out at 2 p.m. for the 90-mile drive to Rochester Hills. I parked near the Red Roof Inn by room 168, but didn't see Sally's car. I waited, thinking about her and the kids. Around 5, I saw John and Craig arrive in a red pickup, laughing and unloading bags. They went into a nearby room, and after about 45 minutes, they left. I followed them to Tupper's Pub, where I parked on the street and waited. Soon, I spotted Sally's car and parked so I could see both it and the truck. I debated going inside, but stayed in the car, listening to country songs that matched my mood. At 9 p.m., the 4 of them finally left, laughing and holding hands. I decided to beat them back to the hotel. I parked, and 10 minutes later, they pulled in. I watched them outside, talking and laughing under the light by room 1. John tossed a coin, and Craig kissed Sally. Debbie grabbed John's hand, and they all went into different rooms, still laughing. My mind raced. Was this some kind of game? The pain hit hard, and the voice in my head screamed, "Do something." I couldn't undo what had happened. 10 years of marriage, a family, all ruined. What good would confronting them do now? At least I'd know the truth. Then John came out of Debbie's room holding a beer, dressed in boxer shorts. He walked over to Sally's room and knocked. A few minutes later, Craig came out of Debbie's room, no shirt or shoes. They talked briefly before high-fiving each other. John went into Sally's room and Craig went back to Debbie's. Suddenly, it hit me. I'd completely lost control. A voice screamed in my head, "Do something now!" I felt a surge of madness. Unable to stop, I put on my driving gloves, got out of the car, and walked straight to room 168. I covered the peephole with my thumb and knocked twice. As the door began to open and John said, "What the hell, Craig?" I threw a punch, kicking him with all my anger. John stumbled back and fell to the floor, hands over his face. I noticed the disarray in the room, the overturned bed, the bathroom door slightly ajar, and the shower running. I unsheathed my knife and tapped it against John's nose. His eyes widened in fear. "How long, John? How long has this been going on?" "Don't lie to me," I said coldly. 2 years, he stammered, eyes wide. "Joining the same racquetball league wasn't a coincidence?" "No," he whispered, closing his eyes in pain. I leaned in. "You're sick, John. Look at me." I paused. "If you ever go near Sally or any other married woman again, I'll find you and make sure you regret it. Understand?" "Yes," he wheezed, terrified. Suddenly, I smelled something foul. The shower stopped, and I heard Sally's voice. "Hey, John boy, I thought you were joining me in the shower." I turned, just as Sally appeared in the bathroom doorway, towel in hand, her face draining of color as she saw me. Shock overtook her as the towel fell to the floor. "John boy doesn't seem well," I growled, stepping toward her. Panic flashed in her eyes as she slammed the bathroom door shut. I walked over to the nightstand, cut the phone cord with my knife, and sheathed the blade. Then I stormed out, but not before throwing the phone violently into the bathroom door, causing a loud crash and a terrified scream from inside. I stepped outside, took a deep breath, and realized I wasn't done yet. I headed to the next room. I knocked on the door of Craig's room. When it opened, I punched him under the chin. He went down, and Debbie, wide-eyed and in a panic, sat in bed. I checked Craig's pulse. He was fading. I went to the nightstand, pulled the phone cord, and turned to Debbie. "If you tell your husband about tonight, tell him I said hi," I said sarcastically, then added, "or maybe I'll tell him myself." I tossed the phone into the corner and left. Outside, I looked up at the sky and took a deep breath, the tension gradually fading. The voice in my head was silent now. Everything was done. It was time to move on with my life. As I made my way to the car, my phone rang. Annoyed, I answered. "Yeah?" "Phil, it's Jack," came the voice on the other end. "What's going on?" I asked, my tone uninterested. "Sally's at the house crying. She says she's afraid to go home." I glanced at the clock, almost 1 p.m., nearly 14 hours since I'd left Rochester Hills. "I don't know what I could have done," I muttered, feeling confused. "She says you hurt Debbie's friends badly last night." "Hurt them? They're lucky I didn't eliminated them," I shot back sarcastically. "What the hell? That's not like you," Jack responded, clearly shocked. I paused for a moment, then asked, "Did Sally tell you where the fight happened? She mentioned it was outside a restaurant in Rochester Hills." "So she's trying to avoid it?" Jack replied, his tone sharp. "Well, with her family and history." I trailed off. "Sally's your daughter, so I guess it must be true," I said slowly, sensing Jack was processing everything. "Phil, I'm bringing Sally home. We need to talk," Jack said. "No problem," I replied. "I'm not going anywhere." Jack hung up, but I heard Sally in the background. "No, Dad, no." I sighed. She's not making this easy, I thought. I was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking my second beer and looking through old photos when Jack and Sally arrived. Sally clung to Jack's arm, pulling him toward the door. "Please, Dad, let us talk. Phil and I need some time alone." Sally was makeup-free, her hair loose, eyes red and swollen, shaking like a nervous wreck. She wouldn't look at me, trying to guide Jack back toward the door, but he sat down at the table, his eyes darting between me and the KA knife beside my beer. "Okay, Phil, what's going on?" Jack asked, his voice tight. I looked at Sally and mockingly said, "Yes, Sally, tell your dad what's going on." She snapped, "Shut up, Phil, you and I can work this out." Her commanding voice didn't match the pleading in her eyes. I was furious. The idea that she thought we could fix this alone, or that she could manipulate me, pushed me further. I was determined to be as honest as she was dishonest. I turned to Jack. "Sally and her boss Debbie have a couple of girlfriends they go out with when they're out of town." "I found out, and didn't take it well." I paused, then added, "I might have been a little more polite than she deserved." Sally sighed, sitting down, her face dropping. Jack looked at me in disbelief. "No, Phil, Sally wouldn't do that. I don't believe you." "Enough, Phil," Jack snapped, his anger rising. "You're being cruel." I stared at him, then shot back. "Cruel? You would have seen what I saw last night, another man's footprints in her hotel room." I said it flatly. Jack's eyes flicked to Sally, and her panicked expression made it clear I was telling the truth. Jack slumped in his chair, his face crumpling as he covered it with his hands, whispering, "Oh, God." Sally's face turned pale. "Please, Dad, don't tell Mom. We can work this out, can't we? Please, Phil," she begged. I said nothing, just sifted through the old photos, lost in the pain of the past. After a few minutes, Jack straightened up, wiped his eyes, and asked, "What are you going to do, Phil?" He looked at Sally, whose tears hadn't stopped. I thought for a moment, then said, "I never told either of you about Vietnam, or Ripcord." I sighed. "Hell, I never told anyone about Ripcord, not even my therapist." I waved at the pile of photos on the table. "Isn't it funny, Jack? Your generation proudly displays their war medals, while mine hides its memories in shoeboxes, locked away." I picked up an old, faded photo of 2 young soldiers in jungle uniforms, smiling like it was some casual outing. Jace and I were dropped at Ripcord in May 1971. It was just another base in our rotation, set up tools, supported the troops, and moved on. I paused, looking at Jack. But this time, it was different. We were stationed on a remote ridge near the Laos border, overlooking the A Shau Valley. It was a bad place for the U.S. military. Previous battles there had cost many lives. The Ripcord base was meant to support 4 battalions of the 101st Airborne, trying to stop the NVA from pushing down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I shook my head. What a joke. The base had our 155 battery, a mortar platoon, and a company of infantry. We had 2 helicopter pads and a few other basic units, maybe 400 men at most. The whole base was underground, bunkers, trenches, tunnels. We didn't know until later that we were surrounded by 12,000 NVA soldiers. I met Jack's eyes. "Does that remind you of anything, Jack? Like your Marines at Chosin Reservoir?" Jack nodded slowly, lost in thought. After a moment of silence, I spoke. "The first few weeks weren't so bad for us," I said. "But for those dropped into combat positions on the hills, it was hell. Helicopters were in and out from dawn till dusk. We only took occasional sniper or automatic fire, but the incoming anti-aircraft fire grew stronger." I looked at Jack, then continued. "On July 1st, everything changed. Just after 7 a.m., we took our first mortar fire. For the next week, the NVA bombarded us with 30 shells a day from 60 and 81 mm mortars. Then they started using 120 mm mortars, new weapons that had never been outside the DMZ. The worst part," I said, my voice trailing off, "was that you couldn't always hear the shells coming. The wind, helicopters, and artillery fire made it hard to tell. One day, I was running from the mess hall to the bunker when a mortar blast knocked me down. I got to the bunker and Jace, looking up, said, 'Damn, Phil, you're bleeding.' I smiled weakly at the memory. I'd forgotten my body armor that day. Never again, I added with a sigh. The shrapnel shot me under my right shoulder blade. They evacuated me to Camp Evans to have it removed. It wasn't serious, but they kept me for a couple of days for a concussion. By the time I returned to Ripcord, we were taking 80 shells a day. It got heavier. Mortars, rocket-propelled grenades, recoilless tools. We were losing more men every day. Our tools were firing nonstop. We were using so much ammo the batteries ran out in hours. Chinooks brought in more shells, while .51 caliber NVA fire rained down on them. Once they dropped off ammo, we rushed in to load the tools. I paused, recalling the chaos. During one of these operations, I took another half-dozen shrapnel wounds. Between the constant bombardment, our regular work, and bringing ammo to the tools, we were beyond exhausted. Planes, F-4S, Phantoms, even B-52S, were constantly around, bombing the hills. Smoke and tear gas from the NVA lingered in the air. And after July 8th, when we first spotted the dinkies in the wire, we were on high alert every night. We knew an attack was coming, we just didn't know when. The room was quiet, the weight of the moment settling in. Jack's face was grim, and Sally looked like she was bracing herself. I took a deep breath. As the shelling continued, we started taking serious casualties. Morale was plummeting. We felt abandoned. Before it was over, I said quietly, we lost over 500 men, dead and wounded. I was assigned to carry body bags to the helipad for evacuation. I looked at Jack, my eyes filling. On July 18th, the worst thing happened. A Chinook carrying howitzer shells was hit and crashed over a battery and ammo supply point. The explosion was massive. The battery burst into flames and explosions kept going for hours. All 6 tools were destroyed and dozens of men were injured. I paused, the image still fresh. We rushed to the battery to help. Many of the wounded had severe burns from the aviation fuel. Jace and I lifted one machine gunner onto a stretcher. When I grabbed his arm, the skin came off in my hand. The smell of burning flesh. I'll never forget it. Jack nodded gravely, his face filled with grief. Sally looked horrified as I spoke. I wiped my eyes and pressed on. We all knew this position wouldn't hold, but the brass didn't care. They saw it as a chance to hit the enemy. After all, we had almost 4 NVA regiments in one spot. A few nights later, I said, my voice growing colder, we went on high alert. We were hit with automatic weapons fire around the perimeter. Jace and I set up an M60 in a trench in front of the FDC bunker, ready for an attack. The mortar platoon kept firing flares, and the infantry returned fire along the jungle's edge. Every few minutes, I continued, artillery ships flew overhead, firing rockets and miniguns at suspicious targets. Jace and I didn't return fire often, to avoid drawing attention to our position, especially since there was an infantry squad just 20, 30 yards ahead. This night, I went on, my tone distant, the infantry kept popping up and firing grenades and automatic weapons. Then suddenly, 20 MMM mortar rounds hit their position. The ground shook as we dove into our foxhole. I paused, the danger still fresh in my mind. When we peeked out, the infantry trench was completely buried. We quickly took up firing positions, and Jace started shooting while I fed him ammo. The platoon sergeant crawled over, and we told him what happened. He nodded, ducked down, and rushed off for more ammo. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to continue. Just as we were finishing the last ammo belt, I heard an M16 shot. It felt like being hit with a baseball bat in my back and thighs. I collapsed on the edge of the trench, staring into Jace's eyes. I saw the realization in his face, but he couldn't speak. I held his hand. He squeezed it once, then the light left his eyes. I knew it was over. My throat tightened. My best friend, my brother, was gone. I felt completely alone. I wiped my eyes again, hearing Sally sniffle, but I wasn't sure whether it was for Jace or her own emotions. I took a deep breath and went on. I looked up to see Corporal Tran standing in front of us, an M16 aimed at us. Tran was one of Kit Carson's scouts, a North Vietnamese deserter. He fired a whole clip at us. I took a couple of bullets in my back, but my body armor saved me from worse, though I had broken ribs and a severe concussion. One bullet shot my thigh but didn't hit bone. I started to go into shock, realizing Jace was gone and I'd been shot. I paused, steadying myself. I fought to stay conscious. I couldn't let myself pass out. I focused on anger, thinking of getting revenge on the enemy. As the rage built, my vision blurred, and my mind clouded with hatred. Tran noticed I was moving and tried to shoot again, but he had emptied his clip. I played dead, and he must have decided I was done. He dropped his rifle, jumped over our trench, and started waving a flashlight, shouting in Vietnamese. I pressed on, shaking as I recalled the chaos. Then a rocket-propelled grenade flew from the bushes, narrowly missing both of us. Tran kept waving his flashlight like a madman. Through the flare light, I saw 3 figures, sappers, emerge from the jungle, wearing satchel charges and holding AK-47s. I barely had the strength to stand, but I grabbed the M60 beneath Jace and aimed at them. I fired 2 long bursts before the belt ran out. The sappers went down, and Tran stared at me, shocked. He screamed, spitting as he grabbed a machete from his belt. Most scouts carried them to navigate the jungle, I added. I barely had time to get my foot on the trench's edge and push off before Tran lunged at me. I dropped the M60 and grabbed my knife. We were almost unconscious, but I managed to get on top of him. He reached for the machete, but never got it. I closed my eyes, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know how long I sat there, surrounded by the flickering light of flares, explosions, tracer rounds, howitzers rumbling, and the smell of cordite and burning debris. It felt like I was in hell. I continued hoarsely. Eric, my platoon sergeant, pulled me by one arm and Lieutenant Dixon by the other. Dixon was shouting for me to get to the bunker, napalm was coming, and we were too close to the wire. I took a sip of beer, tracing my knife across the purple hearts on the table. Jack and Sally were silent. I couldn't bring myself to look at them. I went on. That's when I lost consciousness. I woke up in a medical bunker with an IV in my arm. A battalion surgeon and corpsmen were working on me. Doc said I'd probably survive and that they'd evacuate me at dawn, I added, my voice shaky. I was flown out around noon, miraculously. Every helicopter was under heavy fire. 2 had already been shot down. Mine took several hits, one that liquidated the crew commander. But by then, they'd decided to evacuate Ripcord. I paused, looking at the table. They took everyone out on the 21st and bombed the place. I didn't care. 24 hours later, I was on a flight to Japan, then transferred to Walter Reed for a month. I sighed deeply. While I was there, some colonel who probably never heard of ripcord handed me a medal for eliminating my enemies. I took the silver star from the box and placed it beside the purple hearts. It was the same one on Jack's mantle. I shook my head. The doctors treated me well, but mentally I wasn't fine. I had nightmares every night, couldn't shake the sounds, smells, and faces of the dead and wounded. I paused, looking away. I missed Jace's funeral, but went home before reporting to SIL base. I visited Jace's parents. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. They wanted to know about Vietnam, what happened to Jace, but didn't ask a single question. I swallowed, struggling to speak. Why did I survive and he didn't? I said softly. I ask myself that every day. I stared blankly ahead, lost in thought. I was in therapy, but felt withdrawn from the world. I did the bare minimum at Fort Sill and buried myself in college drafting to avoid socializing. When I left the Army, I moved back with my parents and went to school, not because I cared, but because I didn't know what else to do. I looked up at Sally. Then I met you, I whispered. Sally lowered her gaze, her voice trembling. You brought me back to life. You were happy, engaged in everything, beautiful inside and out, everything I thought I wasn't. You made me want to live again. You gave me a glimpse of what life could be. She paused, her voice breaking. I fell in love with you. You saved me, and you gave me 3 beautiful children. I'll always be grateful for that. I sighed. For a while, we just sat there, not moving. Finally, Jack cleared his throat. What now, Phil? I turned to him, tired. Jack, I've been betrayed twice in my life. Both times, I lost my best friend. Sally started sobbing. No, no, no. The room was silent. Sally cried. Jack and I had tears in our eyes. Jack asked quietly, Are you sure, Phil, you want to throw it all away over one mistake? Sally lifted her head, a flicker of hope in her eyes. I knew what I had to say would end our marriage, but I couldn't let the lie stand. I shook my head. The mistake wasn't just one, Jack. I looked at Sally, my voice firm. I found out last night that Sally's been cheating on me for almost 2 years, and it wasn't just with one man. Sally sighed, closed her eyes, and shook her head, sinking deeper into her chair, looking even paler than before. I turned to Jack. Does that answer your question? I asked. Jack stood up slowly, his eyes full of sorrow as he looked at Sally. You're my daughter, and I should love you, but I've lost all respect for you, your actions. He trailed off, unable to find the words, just shaking his head. Sally reached out, but Jack pulled away. He looked at me and said firmly, Phil, you don't deserve this. Do what you have to do, but don't hurt her. I couldn't take it anymore. No, Jack, I'm beyond that, I replied. But if it makes you feel better, take this. I slipped the knife back into its sheath and handed it to him. Jack accepted it silently, then turned to leave. His shoulders slumped, and I could tell he was already thinking about how to tell Emily when the door closed behind him. The phone rang, but neither of us moved or spoke. The ringing eventually stopped, and the silence was deafening. Finally, I broke it, staring blankly ahead. I thought the cops would be here this morning, not your father. Sally flinched and stumbled over her words. Debbie and I told them to say we were attacked outside the bar. We hoped if they kept quiet, you wouldn't call their wives. I processed this, realizing I was free. There was no way their story would hold up. For a moment, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, but then I remembered everything was falling apart around me. So, where are they now? I asked flatly. Sally cleared her throat, fidgeting in her chair. They're still in the hospital, under observation. You hurt them badly. John has a broken nose, cheekbone, and ribs. Craig has a dislocated jaw, broken teeth, and a concussion. I replied bluntly, Don't forget their balls, Sally. Fear filled her eyes. No, you really hurt them. She paused, then added, I didn't know you were so cruel, Phil. Did you have to do that? I stared at her, incredulous. You're defending those fools? I said sarcastically. Before she could respond, the phone rang again. You should answer it, I said, heading to the bathroom. It's probably for you. I washed my face, looking at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red and puffy. I looked as worn down as I felt. It had been a sleepless night. Back in the kitchen, Sally was standing there, staring at the phone. Slowly, she hung it up and collapsed into a chair. When I sat back down, she spoke, her voice distant. "Did you have to tell Debbie's husband?" I shrugged. "Why shouldn't I? He already called John and Craig's wives and kicked Debbie out. She's going to need a lawyer if she wants to see her daughter." Sally started crying again. Crap, crap, crap. Through her tears, she looked up at me. "And she fired me. Said it was all my fault." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, that's just perfect." I paused. "Tell me, Sally, who introduced you to John and Craig? It was Debbie, wasn't it?" Through sniffles, she asked, "How did you know?" I smiled grimly. "When I told Josh about what you and Debbie did last night, he didn't believe me. Called me a liar, accused me of trying to ruin his marriage. But when I mentioned John Harrison's name, he turned pale and started swearing. First time I ever saw him angry." I paused. "You told me years ago that Debbie's second marriage was strained and she was estranged from her parents. Well, she has a sister upstate she doesn't talk to either." I took a breath. "About a year ago, Josh was auditing a company and met Sarah, Debbie's sister. They hit it off, and one night Sarah invited him to dinner with her husband, Dave. Sarah had a story to tell." I looked at Sally, whose face had gone white with shock. "Turns out Dave was Debbie's first husband. She cheated on him throughout their marriage. He found out, kicked her out, and filed for divorce." I stopped, watching Sally's reaction. Debbie never told Josh any of this. And guess who she had an affair with during her first marriage? That's right, John Harrison. Sally froze. I continued. When I mentioned John's name, Josh put the pieces together and realized Debbie had been doing the same thing to him that you did to me. No wonder he threw her out. I took a deep breath. "And like Josh, I'm wondering how long you've been fooling around with me," I said firmly. Sally cried again. "Oh my God, Phil. It was just John and Craig, just during our shopping trips. Please believe me." I hadn't thought about anyone else until Debbie mentioned it. Before our first shopping trip, she sat there, twirling a handkerchief, crying and begging. "Please, Phil. I don't know how I ended up here. It's like I woke up from a nightmare. When I walked into the bathroom and saw you there, I didn't say anything, just looked at her grimly. Encouraged, she spoke quickly. I knew Debbie liked to play, but I didn't expect her to hook up with anyone on our trip." She paused, biting her lip. "John showed up at the restaurant. Debbie said she'd known him since high school, but I suspected that wasn't true. He was charming, flirted, danced with both of us, complimented me a lot. I had a few more drinks than usual, and when his hands got too familiar on the dance floor, I pretended not to notice. Later, Debbie went with John to the room next to ours. I realized she set the whole thing up. The walls were thin, and I could hear them all night. That explains why you were like that when you came home, right?" I looked at her with disgust. "Sally, you're unbelievable." Sally hung her head and wiped her eyes. The next morning, John was gone. We had breakfast, and Debbie went on and on about their night together, raving about him the whole way home. She paused, then added, "Over the next few months, Debbie and I had lunch a couple times a week. She'd always talk about John and how much fun they had." "That's when I first heard about his wart," Sally said softly. Debbie joked I should try it, but at first I just laughed it off. The more she talked, though, the more the idea stuck in my head. A few months later, when another shopping trip came up, Debbie confessed that John really wanted to be with me, and she didn't mind. I laughed, but I asked her what she'd do if I went along with it, Sally continued. She said John had a friend, Craig, who would keep her company. I didn't say no, though I don't know why. I told her I'd think about it, but I wasn't sure I could. Sally looked at me, but I just stared back blankly. I knew it was wrong, Phil, but I thought I could do it and no one would ever know. She looked down again, her voice soft. That Saturday night, John and Craig came to the restaurant. We had dinner, drinks, and then went to a nightclub. We split into couples, and I ended up with John. I'd had enough to drink by then and convinced myself it was fine. Everyone was having a great time. Later, we went back to the motel, and John and I went to our room while Debbie and Craig went to theirs. Sally fell silent, staring at her hands. I finally spoke dismissively. So, was it what you expected? Sally looked at me with tears in her eyes. It was fine. It wasn't better than what we have, but it was exciting because it was wrong, and I could pretend to be someone else. You mean it wasn't just okay? I said bitterly. He turned you on so much that you forgot about your husband at home? The one who takes care of the kids so you could be alone." Sally turned away, fighting a sob. "Yes," she whispered. "And Craig." "My husband?" I said sarcastically. Without looking at me, she replied, "After we slept with John a few times, Debbie joked she was starting to miss him. I didn't think much about it, but the next trip, when we split into couples, I danced with Craig most of the night. Later, he came to my room and we spent the night together. It didn't seem like a big deal. Then, a couple trips later, John and Craig swapped in the middle of the night. I didn't realize at first until I woke up and realized the man in my bed wasn't the one I started with." Sally looked at me sadly. I felt like two different people living in two different worlds. I liked our life, our family, but I got hooked on those weekends. I thought I could have both, and you'd never find out. How stupid was I? "Damn stupid," I agreed. "And then when you saw me at the motel, I looked in the mirror and realized what I had become," she whispered. I stood up and looked down at her. "Interesting story, Sally. Too bad it doesn't have a happy ending. Or maybe it does for you. I'm going to get the kids. Tonight, after Allie's asleep, we'll sit down with Jason and Jesse and tell them their parents will be living apart. I'll leave out the details to minimize the trauma. I'll sleep on the couch until I figure out what comes next," Sally shouted after me, crying. "Phil, don't do this. I love you. Please, don't." I turned to her. "Why not?" Through sobs, she begged. "It was only a few nights a year. I never saw John or Craig outside those weekends. Please, Phil, forgive me. Let me fix it." "Forgive you?" I shook my head. "Forgive you for being a promiscuous for other men a few nights a year? For giving away the thing you valued most? Yourself? For destroying my trust? My belief that we belong to each other?" I sighed. "And how do you fix that? Can you undo it? Can you not be with John or Craig? Because that's what it takes to make it right." I looked around the kitchen. The family photos, the kids' drawings, Allie's baby chair in the corner, everything that made this place a home. I spent most of last night thinking about how I'll feel in 6 months, a year, or 5 years. I might forgive you, but I won't forget. I paused, my voice breaking. Every time I see you, I'll remember last night. Every time I hear your voice or your name, I'll think of it. And that, Sally, I can't live with. I stood silently for a moment, barely noticing Sally rocking back and forth, crying, whispering, "No, please, God, no." A few minutes later, I spoke softly. "Can you answer me one question, Sally?" She looked up at me, empty-eyed, like a condemned prisoner awaiting the sentence. "You lost the man who loved you more than anything. You lost the respect of your parents, my parents, and me. You lost your job. And someday, you'll have to explain to our children why you destroyed our family. Was it worth it?" After a long silence, broken only by her sobs, I turned and slowly walked out the door.